He ran one of the most feared criminal empires in Los Angeles, a Korean mafia boss who had never knelt before anyone. Not before rivals, not before federal agents, not before men who had put guns to his head and lived to regret it. Kang Joon-ho, they called him the Black Dragon, was a man who controlled everything. Territory, money, fear. Everything. Except one night. One single night in a gallery with a woman he would never see coming. She was black, beautiful, and brilliant. An architect who had built her entire world with her own hands, who answered to no one, who needed nothing from anyone. They spoke for 40 minutes in front of the painting of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. He gave her a false name. He left before dawn. He erased himself like she had never happened. But biology does not take orders from the Black Dragon. 14 months later, a DNA result arrived. 99.97%. And the most powerful, most untouchable man in Southern California. The man with the dragon tattoo crawling up his neck. The man whose name made rooms go quiet, found himself on his knees, on a playmat, in the apartment of the woman he abandoned, reaching out to a child he never knew existed. He thought she was just one night. The DNA said otherwise. And what happened next? What this black woman did, how she stood in that doorway without flinching, without asking for a single thing he hadn't earned, changed both of them forever. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. There are cities that never sleep, and then there is Los Angeles, a place that doesn't sleep because it is too busy pretending. Pretending that the lights are glamour and not surveillance. Pretending that the men in tailored suits are businessmen and not executioners. Pretending that power has a face you can recognize, when in truth, the most dangerous men in any room are the ones nobody is looking at. Kang Joon-ho was never the man anyone looked at first. That was, of course, precisely the point. He stood near the far wall of the Halverson Gallery on a Thursday evening in late October, a glass of whiskey held loosely in his left hand, his eyes moving across the room with the quiet, methodical patience of a man who had spent a lifetime reading spaces and the people inside them. The gallery was full. Architects, investors, a handful of city council members who believed their attendance at cultural events absolved them of their dealings in darker rooms. Joon-ho knew most of them. Not personally, professionally. In the way that a chess player knows every piece on the board without ever having to touch them. He was not supposed to be there. His head of security, a stocky man named Park, had advised against it. Too exposed, Park had said. Too many eyes. But Joon-ho had come anyway, because there were moments, rare, almost embarrassing moments, when he needed to be somewhere that had nothing to do with territory, debt, or the careful management of violence. The painting on the wall in front of him was of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her back to the viewer, her arms loose at her sides. She was not jumping. She was not retreating. She was simply standing there, at the edge of something enormous, deciding nothing yet. He had been looking at it for 11 minutes when she appeared beside him. He did not hear her approach. That alone was enough to make him take notice. Very few people moved through a room without Joon-ho registering their trajectory long before they arrived. But she had come from his right, from a blind angle created by a column, and she had stopped beside him without announcement. Without the performance that most people enacted when they realized who was standing near them. She simply looked at the painting. "She's not afraid," the woman said. Not to him exactly, more to the air between them. Junho looked at her then. Really looked. She was tall, with the kind of posture that is not taught but earned. The posture of someone who has had to take up space in rooms that were not designed for her. Her skin was dark and luminous under the gallery lighting, and her hair rose from her head in a full, natural crown that made her seem, in that particular light, like something carved rather than born. She wore a caramel blazer over black tailored trousers, and large gold hoops caught the light each time she turned her head. Her handbag, a structured caramel leather piece, clean and expensive without announcing itself, hung from her shoulder with the same quiet confidence that she herself carried. She was looking at the painting, but she was also, without appearing to do so, looking at him. "How do you know?" he said. She tilted her head slightly. Her hands. They're open. Afraid people make fists. Junho looked back at the painting. She was right. The woman on the cliff had her palms facing outward, fingers loose and separate, as though she were offering something to the open air. "Diana Cole," she said and extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was precise. "June," he said. "Just June. No last name." He never gave his last name. What Junho did not know, what he could not have known because he was a man who had long ago stopped believing that the universe operated on anything other than calculation and consequence, was that this was the night his life would divide itself in two. There would be everything before Diana Cole and everything after. He would not understand this for 14 months. By then, the division would already be irreversible. They spoke for 40 minutes. He learned that she was an architect, that she had built her firm from nothing, with no family money and no institutional backing. Only the specific stubbornness of a woman who had decided, at 19, that she would rather fail at something real than succeed at something borrowed. He told her almost nothing about himself, only that he was in imports, which was technically true in the way that most useful lies contain a core of fact. She did not press him. She seemed, he thought, entirely uninterested in what he did for a living. She was interested in what he saw. That was unusual. Almost no one asked Kang Junho what he saw. The gallery began to empty around them, and neither of them moved toward the door. The painting of the woman on the cliff was still there, patient as ever, waiting at its edge. A server passed with champagne, and Diana traded her empty glass for a full one without breaking the conversation. Junho watched her do it, the ease of it, the complete lack of self-consciousness, and felt something shift in the architecture of the evening. He was not a man who permitted himself to feel things without first identifying them. But this feeling arrived faster than the identification, and by the time he had located it, it had already taken up residence. They left together, not with words, with a pause, a look, the particular grammar of two people deciding something without saying it. His car was outside. She did not ask whose car it was. She did not ask about the man who opened the door without being instructed to. She stepped inside with the same composure she had worn all evening, and Junho stepped in after her. And somewhere in the city, the night continued without them. What happened next belonged only to them, to the specific darkness of a penthouse above the city, to the kind of hours that exist outside the logic of ordinary time. They were not drunk. They were not reckless. They were two people who had, against all probability, recognized something in each other and had chosen, for one night, to follow that recognition wherever it led. He left before she woke. He did this not with cruelty, but with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had long ago decided that attachment was a liability he could not afford. He placed nothing on the nightstand. He left no note. The name he had given her was not his name. The number she might have asked for did not exist. He moved through the pre-dawn apartment with the practiced silence of a man who had been leaving rooms without consequence for 20 years. Little did he know, little did Kang Jun-ho, the Black Dragon, the man who controlled the largest criminal network in Southern California, the man who had never once been surprised by the outcomes of his own decisions. Little did he know that he had left something behind. Not in that apartment. Not in that room. Inside Diana Cole. She did not know it yet either. She woke to the empty apartment with the particular clarity that follows a night of genuine connection, and she looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and she thought, that was real. And then she thought, and it's already over. And she rose from the bed with the same composure she had carried into the gallery the night before. And she made coffee, and she went to her drafting table, and she began to work. She was good at moving forward. She had always been good at moving forward. 3 weeks later, she sat on the edge of her bathtub, holding a test strip in both hands, and the number 2 appeared in the small window with the calm indifference of a fact that has no interest in your feelings about it. She sat there for a long time. She did not cry. She was not, in the end, a woman who cried before she thought. She thought first, and then she cried. And then she stopped. And then she made a decision. She tried, in the days that followed, to find him. The name he had given her returned nothing. The number she had not asked for did not exist to return. She described him to a colleague who moved in certain circles. The tattoos, the watchful eyes, the precise stillness of a man who was always calculating. And the colleague went quiet in a way that told her something. She did not pursue it further. She made her decision. His name would be Marcus. Marcus Cole. And he would be hers, and she would be enough. And the man who had left before dawn would remain what he had always intended to be. A closed door. What Diana did not know, as she sat at her drafting table 14 months later, watching Marcus pull himself upright against the leg of her desk with the triumphant, unsteady pride of a child discovering gravity. What she could not have known was that a photograph had just appeared in a business journal. A photograph of a man in a black suit, standing at the entrance of a new waterfront development, his face turned slightly toward the camera, the dragon tattoo visible at his collar. Her colleague had forwarded it without comment. Diana looked at the photograph for a long time. Marcus laughed at the desk leg. The afternoon light came through the window and fell across them both. And the closed door, quietly, without asking permission, began to open. There is a particular kind of stillness that falls over a person in the moment before they make a decision that will change everything. It is not peace. It is not hesitation. It is the body understanding, before the mind has finished its argument, that the threshold has already been crossed, that the only question remaining is how far the other side extends. Diana Cole sat with that stillness for 3 days. She did not open the photograph again. She did not need to. It had already installed itself behind her eyes with the permanence of something that cannot be unseen. The angle of his jaw, the particular way he held his shoulders, the tattoo curling at his collar like a signature she had traced once in the dark without knowing what it meant. She went to work. She reviewed blueprints. She attended a site meeting for a mixed-use development in Silver Lake, and said all the correct things at all the correct moments. She came home to Marcus, who greeted her at the door with the absolute, uncomplicated joy that only children and dogs are capable of. Arms raised, whole body leaning forward, as though her arrival were the best thing that had ever happened and would continue to be the best thing every single time. She held him longer than usual that evening. On the fourth day, she called a lawyer. Not a family lawyer, not the kind of soft-voiced mediator who specialized in custody arrangements and child support calculations. She called Jonathan Reeves, a man she had met 3 years prior during a brutal contractual dispute with a development firm that had attempted, systematically and with great confidence, to erase her contribution to a $40 million project. Reeves had taken that case and had not simply won it. He had dismantled the opposition with the quiet, methodical pleasure of a man who genuinely enjoyed the work. He was not cheap. He was not warm. He was, however, absolutely precise, and precision was what this required. She met him in his office on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was with her sister. She sat across from Reeves with her hands folded on the table and explained the situation in the same tone she used to present structural load calculations: factual, sequential, without editorial. One night, no name given, a child born 14 months ago, a photograph identified in a business publication. The man in question, she now understood, was not merely a businessman. Reeves listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You understand," he said, "that if this man is who you believe him to be, the process of compelling a paternity acknowledgement will not be straightforward." "I'm not asking for straightforward," Diana said. "I'm asking for legal." Reeves looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his notepad. "Tell me everything you remember." What followed was not fast. Nothing about it was fast. The law, Diana discovered, moves with the indifferent patience of a glacier. Enormous, unstoppable, and entirely unbothered by the urgency of the people caught in its path. Reeves filed through international civil channels, leveraging a bilateral agreement between the United States and South Korea that most attorneys had never needed to invoke. He was careful. He was thorough. He filed everything twice and documented everything 3 times, because he understood, without Diana having to say it, that the man on the other side of this case would have a legal team whose entire function was to make things disappear. He was right. Within 2 weeks of the initial filing, Reeves received the first contact from the opposing counsel, a firm based in Century City whose letterhead alone communicated a level of institutional weight designed to make smaller attorneys reconsider their involvement. The letter was polite. It was also, read correctly, a threat. It suggested, in the measured language of people who never say directly what they mean, that the claim was without merit, that the timeline was implausible, that their client had no recollection of the individual in question, and that continued pursuit of the matter would be, the word they used was, inadvisable. Reeves forwarded the letter to Diana with a single line of his own appended at the bottom. "They're worried." Good. She read it at her drafting table, Marcus asleep in the next room, the city going about its indifferent business 12 floors below. She folded her phone face down and returned to her blueprints. Little did she know that at that exact moment, in a glass-walled office 30 miles away, Kang Jun-ho was holding the same letter in reverse. Holding the report his legal team had prepared summarizing the claim, the filer, and the child in question. He read it standing up, which was how he read everything that required his full attention. His expression did not change. His breathing did not change. Only his hand, the one holding the report, tightened almost imperceptibly at the edge of the paper. "Find out who she is," he said. His assistant, a young man named So, who had learned very early in his employment that questions were not part of his function, left the room immediately. What came back was thorough. Diana Cole, 29, founder and principal architect of Cole Studio, established 4 years prior, currently operating out of a Midtown Manhattan office with a satellite presence in Los Angeles. Educated at Columbia. No criminal record. No debt. No known associations with any rival organization or law enforcement body. She was, by every measurable metric, exactly what she appeared to be. A private individual with no angle and no leverage beyond the legal mechanism she had already set in motion. Junho read the file twice. He set it down. He walked to the window of his office and looked out at the harbor, where 3 container ships were moving through the gray morning water with the slow, enormous confidence of things that cannot be hurried. He thought about October. He thought about a gallery and a painting of a woman on a cliff. He thought about the particular quality of a conversation that had felt, against all reason, like recognition rather than introduction. He did not think about what he had left behind. He had trained himself over many years not to think about what he left behind. It was the only way to keep moving. Shut it down, he told his legal team the next morning. Bury the filing. Make it procedurally impossible to advance. They did. For a while, it worked. Motions were filed. Jurisdictional challenges were raised. The international channel that Reeves had invoked was clogged with procedural objections that had no merit but consumed time, and time in legal combat is its own form of attrition. Reeves called Diana on a Wednesday evening to tell her they had hit a wall. How long? She asked. Months, he said. Possibly longer. There was a silence on the line. Then Diana said, "Keep going." She did not say it loudly. She did not say it with the performance of determination. She said it the way she said everything, with the flat, load-bearing certainty of a woman who had decided something and would not be revisiting the decision. Reeves kept going. What Junho's legal team had not anticipated, what they had failed to account for in their construction of procedural obstacles, was that Jonathan Reeves had, many years prior, clerked for a federal judge who now sat on the international arbitration panel that governed exactly the kind of bilateral civil matter they were attempting to obstruct. This connection was not a favor. It was not even a conversation. It was simply a pathway, quiet and unremarkable, that existed inside the machinery of the law, and that Reeves knew how to walk. The procedural wall came down. The order for a court-mandated DNA sample arrived at the offices of Junho's legal team on a Thursday morning. His lead attorney called him immediately. Junho listened to the entire explanation without speaking. When the attorney finished, there was a silence on the line that the attorney later described to a colleague as the most uncomfortable 4 seconds of his professional career. "Comply," Junho said. The attorney paused. "Sir, there are still avenues we haven't—" "Comply." He said it the way a door closes. Final. Without drama. What no one in that office understood, what even Junho himself had not yet fully articulated to the interior of his own mind, was why. Why comply when obstruction was still possible? Why surrender the procedural ground that had been so carefully constructed? The answer lived somewhere below logic. It lived in the part of him that had stood in front of a painting at 11 minutes past 8 on a Thursday evening in October and felt, for the first time in longer than he could honestly calculate, that he was not performing presence, but actually inhabiting it. It lived in the part of him that had sat across from a woman who had asked what he saw rather than what he owned. It lived, most specifically, in the part of him that had read the file and seen the child's date of birth and done the arithmetic without needing a calculator. The DNA sample was submitted. The processing took 11 days. On the 12th day, a sealed envelope arrived at the offices of Jonathan Reeves. He called Diana before he opened it. She asked him to read it aloud. He did. 99.97%. Diana sat down. Not because her legs gave out. She was not a woman whose legs gave out. She sat down because the moment required it. Because some truths, when they are finally confirmed, deserve to be received from a position of stillness rather than motion. Marcus was on the floor beside her, stacking wooden blocks with the serious, furrowed concentration of a child who has decided that architecture is urgent. "All right," she said quietly. To no one. To the room. And 30 miles away, in a glass office above a harbor, a man in a black suit was reading the same number. And for the first time in a very long time, Kang Jun-ho, the Black Dragon, the man who controlled everything, felt the specific, unfamiliar weight of something he could not buy, threaten, or dissolve. The truth had arrived, and it was 99.97% his. There is a moment in the life of every powerful man when the architecture of his control reveals itself for what it has always been. Not a fortress, but a performance. A very convincing, very expensive, very carefully maintained performance. The walls do not fall all at once. They simply stop pretending to be walls. For Kang Jun-ho, that moment arrived on a Tuesday morning, in the back of a black car moving through Los Angeles traffic, holding a printed copy of a DNA result that he had already memorized and could not stop reading. 99.97. He had built an empire on percentages, on probabilities calculated and recalculated until the margin of error was so small it ceased to exist in any practical sense. He understood, better than most men alive, what 99.97% meant. It did not mean likely. It did not mean probable. It meant settled. It meant done. It meant that somewhere in this city, in an apartment he had never seen, a child was alive who carried half of everything Kang Jun-ho was. His blood, his bone, the particular arrangement of genetic information that had been passed down through a lineage of men who had, generation by generation, survived things that should have ended them. He thought about his father. He thought about his father's hands, broad, scarred, the hands of a man who had worked a fish market in Busan from the age of 12 and had never once spoken about it as hardship, because hardship was simply the texture of life and not a thing requiring commentary. He thought about what his father would say, looking at this paper. He suspected his father would say nothing. He suspected his father would simply look at him with those level, patient eyes and wait for him to understand what he already knew. He folded the paper and placed it in his inside jacket pocket against his chest. "Change of plans," he said to the driver. "I need an address." His assistant, So, looked up from the front seat. "Sir?" "Diana Cole, her Los Angeles address. I need it in the next 10 minutes. So's fingers moved over his phone without comment. What Jun-ho did not do was call ahead. He did not send a representative. He did not have his attorneys draft a formal request for a meeting, or route the contact through any of the careful channels that normally governed his interactions with the outside world. He went, himself, in the back of a single car, with 2 men, not the usual 6. because something in him understood that arriving at this particular door with the full apparatus of the Black Dragon would be precisely the wrong thing. Not tactically, morally. He was not entirely sure when he had last made a decision on moral grounds. The recognition was uncomfortable in the way that unused muscles are uncomfortable when they are suddenly called upon. The building was in West Hollywood. Clean lines, modern, the kind of architecture that was confident without being aggressive. He noticed this in the way that people notice things that reflect their own aesthetic without being able to immediately explain why. He rode the elevator to the 9th floor. He walked to the door at the end of the corridor. He stood in front of it for a moment. And in that moment, in that specific corridor, in that specific building, outside the door of a woman he had met once, for a single evening, 14 months ago, Kang Joon-ho felt something he had not felt since he was 19 years old, and standing outside a different door in a different city, waiting to be told whether the life he had chosen would survive the night. He felt uncertain. He knocked. The silence on the other side of the door lasted long enough that he considered the possibility she was not home. Then he heard movement. Soft, unhurried. And then the particular sequence of sounds that accompanies the presence of a small child in a space. Something being set down. A brief, gentle verbal exchange in a tone too low to parse. And then footsteps approaching the door. It opened. Diana Cole looked at him the way she had looked at the painting in the gallery. Directly, without performance, without the flinch that most people produced when they opened a door and found Kang Joon-ho on the other side of it. She was wearing a white shirt and dark trousers, her hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was, he noted with a clarity that arrived before he could manage it, exactly as he remembered her. More, somehow. The way real things are always more than memory allows. On her hip, held with the easy practice confidence of a mother for whom this was simply the natural arrangement of the world, was a child. Marcus Cole was 14 months old, and he was looking at Joon-ho with the wide, unguarded curiosity that belongs exclusively to children who have not yet learned that strangers are a category requiring caution. He was round-cheeked and bright-eyed, with Diana's mouth and, unmistakably, undeniably, the particular set of the brow that Joon-ho had seen in photographs of himself at that age. Photographs his mother had kept in a lacquered box that he had not opened in 15 years. The three of them existed in the doorway for a moment that had no appropriate length. "You came yourself," Diana said. Not surprised, not warm. Observational, in the way of a person who is filing information and has not yet decided what to do with it. "Yes," Joon-ho said. "Without an army." "Yes." She looked at him for another moment. Then she stepped back from the door. She did not invite him in with words. She simply created space, and he understood that this was the only invitation he was going to receive, and that he should be grateful for it. The apartment was exactly what he would have expected from her, had he thought to expect anything. Clean and considered, with the particular organization of a space where someone both lived and worked. Blueprints on the drafting table, books stacked with the spines aligned, a low shelf near the floor crowded with the soft, primary-colored architecture of a toddler's world. Blocks, a stuffed bear missing one eye, a board book with its cover bent back from repeated reading. He looked at the shelf for a moment longer than he intended to. Diana set Marcus down on the playmat near the window. He immediately crawled to his blocks with the focused urgency of a child who has been interrupted mid-project. She straightened and turned to face Joon-ho, arms folded. Not defensively, but with the posture of a person establishing the geometry of a conversation before it begins. "I'm not here for money," she said. "I want to establish that first." "I know," he said. "I'm not here to threaten you or expose you or use this as leverage for anything." "I know that too." She studied him. "Then why are you here? Your lawyers already received the result. The legal process will move forward regardless of whether you—" "I came," he said, and then stopped. He was not, in ordinary circumstances, a man who stopped in the middle of sentences. Sentences were instruments. You deployed them with precision and they accomplished their function. But the sentence he needed was not an instrument. It was something older and less trained, and it arrived slowly from somewhere he had not accessed in a long time. "I came because I wanted to see him." The room was quiet. Marcus, unaware of the weight of the moment being assembled above him, selected a red block and placed it on top of a blue one with an expression of profound satisfaction. "You left," Diana said. Her voice had not changed in temperature, but something in it had shifted. Not toward anger exactly, but toward the specific gravity of an accounting. "You left before I woke up. You gave me a false name. You made it so I couldn't find you." "Yes." "And now you're standing in my apartment." "Yes." "You should understand," she said, and her voice was very steady, very clear. The voice of a woman who had rehearsed nothing because she had known, at some level, that this day would eventually arrive, and had simply decided in advance who she would be when it did. "That Marcus is mine. Whatever this becomes, whatever you decide you want from this, he is mine first. I have been here every single day. I made every decision alone. I built this life alone. You do not get to walk through that door and have it handed to you." "I'm not asking for it to be handed to me," Junho said. "Then what are you asking?" He did not answer immediately. He looked at her, and then he looked at Marcus, who had at that moment lost his structural integrity. The tower of blocks collapsed sideways, and Marcus looked at the ruin of it with an expression of such genuine astonishment that something in Junho's chest moved without his permission. He crossed the room, not toward Diana, toward Marcus. He lowered himself to the floor. Kang Junho, in his black suit and his Patek Philippe watch, with his dragon tattoo and his empire and his 20 years of constructed invulnerability, and he knelt on the playmat, and he picked up the red block that had fallen farthest, and he held it out. Marcus looked at the block, looked at the man holding it, then reached out with both hands and took it, with the absolute, unceremonious confidence of a child who has not yet learned to question what is offered freely. And then, because he was 14 months old, and the world was still a place of endless, simple wonder, he laughed. It was a small sound, unremarkable to anyone who might have heard it from the hallway. But inside that apartment, in that specific afternoon light, with Diana watching from across the room and Junho kneeling on a playmat holding the structural wreckage of a toddler's block tower, that laugh landed somewhere inside the black dragon like a depth charge, slow and enormous, reaching parts of him he had spent 2 decades sealing shut. He did not move for a long moment. Little did he know that Diana, watching from where she stood, had pressed her hand flat against the wall behind her, quietly, privately where he could not see, because she needed something solid, because the man on the floor was not the man she had prepared herself for. And that was, she was beginning to understand, the most dangerous thing of all. There are truths that arrive like storms, loud, announced, impossible to ignore. And then there are truths that arrive the way water moves through stone, quietly, without drama, over time, until one morning you look at the wall and the wall is no longer there. What happened in the weeks that followed Kang Joon-ho's first afternoon on that playmat was the second kind of truth. It did not announce itself. It simply continued, steady and patient, until the structures built to resist it had no more resistance left to give. He came back. Not the next day. He was not a man who moved without deliberation, and he understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the tolerance of systems under pressure, that arriving too quickly would collapse the fragile geometry that Diana had permitted to exist. He waited 4 days. Then he called the number Reeves had submitted through the legal correspondence, the only number he had for her, the number that belonged to her professional life rather than her personal one, which was itself a kind of message about the distance she maintained. And he asked, without preamble, whether he could come again. There was a silence on the line. "Saturday," she said. 2:00. You have 2 hours. He arrived at 1:58. She noticed. She said nothing about it. The Saturdays became a structure. Not a warm one, not yet. Diana was too careful for warmth, and he was too honest with himself to pretend he had earned it. But it was a structure, and structure was something both of them understood. He came, he sat on the floor. Marcus, who had no ideology about any of this and simply experienced Joon-ho as a large, quiet presence who always arrived with his full attention and never looked at his phone, accepted him with the same uncomplicated openness he extended to everything in his world. The stuffed bear, the board book, the man in the black suit who knew how to build a block tower that was structurally unsound enough to be satisfying to knock over. It was during the third Saturday that Diana said, without looking up from the blueprint she was reviewing at her drafting table, "He's going to need to know who you are eventually." Joon-ho was on the floor, rolling a wooden truck back and forth with Marcus. "I know," he said. "Not a version of you. You." He looked at her then. She was still looking at her blueprint, but her pen had stopped moving. "That conversation," he said carefully, "is one I've been thinking about." "And?" He was quiet for a moment. The truck rolled. Marcus retrieved it and offered it back with the solemn generosity of a child who has decided you are worth sharing with. Joon-ho took it. "I don't know," he said, "how to be known and still keep the people I love safe. I have never solved that problem. I have always chosen one or the other." Diana set her pen down. She turned in her chair and looked at him. Really looked, the same way she had looked at the painting in the gallery, finding the thing beneath the surface. "And which one?" she said. "Did you always choose?" He did not answer. He didn't need to. The answer was in the false name, the pre-dawn departure, the 20 years of rooms entered and exited without leaving anything behind. "You destroyed every connection you ever had," she said, and her voice was not cruel. It was the voice of someone reading a structural report and identifying the load-bearing failure. "Not because you're a monster, because you were afraid of what would happen to the things you loved, if anyone knew you loved them." The room was very quiet. "You are not wrong," he said. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that Joon-ho had not expected and would not forget. "I'm not asking you to stop being afraid. I'm asking you to stop letting the fear make your decisions." He did not respond immediately. There was no response that was adequate in the moment. and he had enough self-knowledge to recognize that attempting one would be worse than silence. He looked at Marcus, who had abandoned the truck and was now attempting, with tremendous seriousness, to fit a square block into a circular hole. An endeavor that was going to fail, that was structurally destined to fail, but that he pursued with complete and undeterred conviction. Junho watched this for a moment. Then quietly, almost to himself, "He doesn't give up." "No," Diana said. "He doesn't." Another silence. This one was different from the ones that had preceded it. Less like distance, more like two people standing on opposite banks of something and finally acknowledging that the water between them is not as wide as it once appeared. What happened next happened slowly, and then all at once, in the way of most things that matter. Junho began to restructure. Not publicly. Public restructuring was not possible, not yet. Perhaps not ever. And he was honest with Diana about this in a conversation that lasted 3 hours one evening, while Marcus slept and the city went dark outside the window. He told her more than he had told anyone in 20 years. Not everything. There were things that, once spoken, could not be unspoken, and he was aware that knowledge was its own form of danger. But enough. Enough for her to see the shape of the life he had built and understand what dismantling it would require, and how long it would take, and why it could not be done in a single gesture. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not waiting for you to become someone else," she said at last. "I'm not interested in a renovation project. What I'm telling you is that Marcus deserves a father who is present. Not perfect, not reformed, not transformed. Present. Consistent. There when he needs to know that he matters more than whatever else is happening." "I understand," Junho said. "Do you?" She looked at him steadily. "Because the men in your world, the men like you, they understand things intellectually and then they go back to what they know. I've seen it. I grew up watching it. I will not let Marcus watch it." "I know you won't," he said. And then, after a pause that carried the weight of everything he was not yet fluent at saying, "I don't want him to watch it either." Diana held his gaze for a long time. There was no softness in her expression. She was not a woman who softened easily, and he had come to understand that this was not coldness but precision. The same precision she brought to everything she built. She was looking at him the way she looked at a structural drawing, finding the weaknesses, measuring the load, determining whether the foundation was real or merely presented. Whatever she found, she did not say. She looked away first, toward the window, toward the city. And when she looked back, something had shifted, almost imperceptibly, in the set of her shoulders. "Same time Saturday," she said. It was not forgiveness. It was not an opening. It was something more durable than either. It was a decision, made by a woman who built things for living, to test whether this particular structure could bear weight before she committed to calling it permanent. He recognized it for what it was. "Same time Saturday," he said. He stood to leave, and as he moved toward the door, he paused, not from hesitation, but from the specific compulsion of a man who has spent a lifetime leaving rooms without looking back, and is, for the first time, looking back. Marcus was asleep on the playmat, the square block still clutched in one small hand, the circular hole undefeated beside him. He had fallen asleep mid-attempt, mid-effort, entirely at peace with the fact that the problem remained unsolved. Junho looked at his son for a long moment. He thought about his own father, about the fish market in Busan, about the lacquered box, about the particular inheritance that passes between fathers and sons, not through instruction, but through proximity, through the simple, irreplaceable fact of being in the room. Being there when the block doesn't fit, and the tower falls, and the laugh comes anyway. Uncomplicated and clean, and utterly without memory of the fall. He had not been in any room that mattered for a very long time. He crouched down, carefully, so as not to wake Marcus, and he took the edge of the small blanket folded on the mat and drew it over him. His hands, the hands of a man who had done things with them that he would not name in this room, in this light, moved with a gentleness that surprised even himself. He stood. He walked to the door. Diana was watching from across the room, and he met her eyes once, briefly. And what passed between them in that moment was not a declaration or a promise or the beginning of something that had a name. It was simpler than that, and harder. It was two people who had arrived at the same doorway from completely different directions, looking at the same small sleeping child, and understanding, separately, privately, in the particular silence of two people who are not yet ready to say the thing aloud, that the doorway was real, and the child was real, and whatever came next would have to be real too. He left. The door closed behind him, not with the pre-dawn silence of a man erasing himself, but with the ordinary, unremarkable sound of a door that expects to be opened again. Diana stood in the quiet apartment for a moment. Then she walked to her drafting table and sat down and picked up her pen. She looked at the blueprint in front of her. A building she was designing in the Arts District, a structure intended to be both open and load-bearing, transparent at the facade and solid at the core. She looked at it for a long time. Then she began to draw. And Marcus slept, and the city turned outside the window, and the square block remained in his hand, undefeated, patient, waiting for the morning when the problem that had not been solved today would be picked up again, without memory of failure, with the complete and absolute conviction that this time, with enough persistence and enough presence and enough willingness to keep trying, it would fit. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been treated as something temporary by someone who didn't understand your worth, only to watch life force them to face exactly what they walked away from? Have you ever had to stand alone, raise something precious entirely on your own strength, and refuse to let bitterness make you small, even when you had every right to let it? And have you ever witnessed the moment when a person built entirely on power and control finally meets the one thing they cannot negotiate with? The truth. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, accountability, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.